So I want to take a minute to explain this graphic organizer for you. You can use it on your quiz, which would be extremely helpful. You'll notice that this is our standard form equation. You might want to label it so that you remember. But this would kind of have everything all in one spot, so that's standard form. Over here we have vertex form. And then here you have different versions of standard form. So here we'll have b is equal to 0 and c is equal to 0. Here we just have b is equal to 0. Here you have just c is equal to 0. So what this tells you is that, like, these are kind of your shortcuts, but I want you to, like, be able to recognize things. So if you fill in everything for standard form and vertex form first, then we can go back and kind of figure out, well, these other ones you can always figure out in an easier way if you know all your rules. If your axis of symmetry for standard form is x equals the opposite of b over 2a, for here it's just x equals h, because remember it shows up opposite that it does in your equation. Okay, your vertex is at the opposite of b over 2a, comma, plug in x. Okay, over here though, it's h, comma, in your equation you can see it's going to be k. Your y-intercept is going to be plug in 0 for x, and when you do, this turns into 0, this turns into 0, and you're left with just your c value. Most of you have figured that out just from 5.1 and 5.2. You guys have realized that your y values are, or your y-intercept is your c value. Okay, so over here you have to plug in your 0. And you just have to plug in x. It's not going to show up in the actual equation. Okay. But for your x-intercept, this one, there's not a good way to actually solve it, so you're just going to have to go off graphing it. Okay. Because if you have an x squared and an x term, you're not going to be able to get x alone. So you're going to have to graph it to find your x-intercept. There are 0, 1, or 2 x-intercepts. It all depends on if it opens up or down and where that vertex is located. Over here, though, we do know our x-intercepts are x, comma, 0. You can plug in 0 for y, or f of x, and solve for x. This one you can get x by itself because there's only one x term. So you'd subtract the k, divide by the a, square root both sides, and from that point, if you can't square root both sides because you have a negative on the one side, then you'll know that there are no x-intercepts. But if you can take the square root, then you keep going, and then you'd add h to both sides, and you would have your 1 or possibly 2 x-intercepts. If you can't take the square root of a negative, then it's no x-intercepts. So let's take a look at your, if there's certain terms that are 0. So over here, the easiest one, if b and c are both 0, now this is going off standard form, so I'm going to look at this. If b is 0 and you divide by a number, you get 0. So your axis of symmetry has to be x equals 0. Since your axis of symmetry started as 0, you're going to have 0, you plug in. What do you get when you plug in 0 here? What's a times 0? Still 0. So that means your vertex would be at 0, 0 in this case. This didn't have a shift. That's why your vertex is there. All it did was stretch it. Okay, that a value tells you it's going to stretch that graph. Okay, your y-intercept, if your vertex is at 0, 0, you already know what you get when you plug in 0. It's your c value, which is 0. You're at 0, 0 still. Your x-intercept, well, you have one of them. You could graph it and figure out your other one, but there's not another one because your vertex only has the one x-intercept, and it's at 0, 0. Okay. Now if b is 0, when you plug in 0 and divide by a number, you're going to get 0. So let's plug in 0. If we plug in 0, this turns into 0, and we add c to it. 0 plus c is c. So our vertex is going to be at 0, C. That's also our y-intercept, because we plug in 0, we're going to get C. Since there's a C, that stays as 0, C. Okay? This one, because there's no x term, you know that this point looks like x comma 0. You can plug in 0 for y, or f of x, depending on which one the function has, and solve for x. That'll work. Okay? Now, this one here. Since B and A are both values, then you're going to find the axis of symmetry the same way we usually do. You'll know that that will be the x value of your vertex, and you can plug in x to find the y. There's no shortcut there. However, if your y-intercept's at 0, C, and you plug in 0, and you say, okay, well, what's the C value? It's 0. So 0, 0 will be your y-intercept. You'll also know then that 0, 0 is going to be one of your x-intercepts, plus you're going to have one more. You're going to have to graph to find it. Okay, so you can use either a table or a graph to find it. But you will have two x-intercepts if it's something like that. So that's your graphic organizer. This should help you on your review for today. Wrong way. So your review assignment is going to be very much like your quiz. You're just going to be asked to find these certain things. Obviously, your quiz won't be that long, and your quiz will look a little bit different because it's going to be in Illuminate. So this won't all be number 1. You will ask to find your axis of symmetry, ask to find the vertex, etc., etc. So if you have any questions, let me know.